Samantha stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she applied her lipstick. It was a shade of red she rarely wore, one that made her feel bold and dangerous, two things she didn't particularly associate with herself. The reflection staring back at her seemed almost unfamiliar. Eyes slightly wider than usual, pupils dilated, lips a shade too dark. She inhaled deeply, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. Tonight was different, and she knew it. She wasn't just going out for a work function, she was heading into dangerous territory, and part of her was excited by it. She had been married to Marcus for 10 years. They had a comfortable life, one filled with mutual respect, steady affection, and the kind of quiet contentment that came with years of companionship. But lately, that contentment had started to feel more like complacency. The routine of their marriage, once reassuring, had begun to feel suffocating, like a weight pressing down on her chest. There were no major arguments, no betrayals or dramatic revelations, just a slow, creeping sense of dissatisfaction that neither of them seemed able to address. It wasn't until Nathan joined her firm that Samantha began to fully recognize the void she had been living with. Nathan was a new hire, brought in to revamp the marketing department with his innovative ideas and bold strategies. He was charming, with an easy smile that made people naturally gravitate toward him. But it wasn't just his charisma that drew Samantha in. It was the way he looked at her, as if he could see beyond the polished exterior she presented to the world. Their interactions started innocently enough, collaborating on projects, sharing ideas over coffee, laughing together in meetings. But there was an undercurrent to their conversations, a tension that neither of them acknowledged, but both felt acutely. It was in the way their eyes lingered on each other just a little too long, the way their hands would brush accidentally when passing papers, the way they gravitated toward each other in a crowded room. Samantha told herself it was harmless, that there was nothing wrong with a little flirtation to spice up the monotony of her work life. But deep down, she knew she was playing with fire. She had always prided herself on her self-control, on her ability to remain professional and detached in all situations. But Nathan was different. He made her feel things she hadn't felt in years: desire, excitement, a wild, reckless abandon that both thrilled and terrified her. Tonight, the firm was hosting a cocktail party to celebrate the successful launch of a new campaign. The event was being held at a chic downtown hotel, and Samantha had spent far too long getting ready, fussing over her outfit, her hair, her makeup. She knew why she was doing it, though she refused to admit it to herself. This wasn't just about looking good for a work event. This was about seeing Nathan, about feeling that thrill of attraction again, about stepping closer to the edge she had been inching toward for months. When she arrived at the hotel, the party was already in full swing. The room was filled with her colleagues, all dressed in their finest, drinks in hand, laughter filling the air. Samantha quickly found herself caught up in conversation, her smile practiced and polite, though her mind was elsewhere, scanning the room for any sign of Nathan. She found him near the bar, talking to a group of co-workers. He looked up as she approached, his eyes lighting up with recognition. The corner of his mouth quirked into a smile, and Samantha felt her heart skip a beat. She joined the group, the ease of their banter quickly dissolving the tension that had been building within her all evening. As the night wore on, the group gradually dispersed, leaving just Samantha and Nathan standing together by the bar. The conversation flowed effortlessly between them, and Samantha found herself laughing more freely than she had in weeks. Nathan was intoxicating, and she was powerless to resist his charm. When he suggested they step outside for some fresh air, Samantha hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. The night was cool, a welcome relief from the warmth of the crowded room. They found a quiet spot on the terrace, away from the noise and the people, the city lights twinkling in the distance. For a while they simply stood there, side by side, the silence between them comfortable, yet charged with unspoken possibilities. Samantha's heart was pounding in her chest, a mix of anticipation and fear. She knew she was standing on the precipice of something that could change everything, And yet, she couldn't bring herself to step back. Nathan turned to her, his gaze intense. "Samantha, I've been thinking about you a lot lately," he admitted, his voice low and serious. Her breath caught in her throat. "Nathan, we can't—" "I know," he interrupted, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I can't help how I feel, and I think you feel the same way." There it was, the truth she had been trying to avoid. The tension between them, the stolen glances, the lingering touches. It all came down to this moment. She could deny it, pretend that everything was fine, that her marriage was fine, that she wasn't standing here wanting another man with a desperation that terrified her. Or she could acknowledge what was happening, confront the feelings that had been bubbling under the surface for months. "I do," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Nathan stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently caress her cheek. "We don't have to do anything, Samantha, but I can't keep pretending I don't want you." Samantha closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. She wanted him, wanted this, but the guilt was already gnawing at her, a sharp pain in her chest. She thought of Marcus, of the life they had built together, the years of companionship and trust. How could she betray him like this? How could she live with herself afterward? But when Nathan's lips brushed against hers, all those thoughts dissolved into a haze of desire. The kiss was gentle at first, testing, as if he was giving her one last chance to pull away. But when she didn't, when she pressed her lips more firmly against his, it was like a dam breaking. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more desperate, as they clung to each other like two people drowning. Samantha knew this was wrong, that she should stop, should walk away before they crossed a line they could never uncross. But she was tired of being the responsible one, tired of denying herself the things she wanted. For once, she wanted to lose herself in the moment, to feel something other than the dull ache of dissatisfaction that had settled over her life. They found themselves in Nathan's hotel room, the door closing behind them with a soft click. Samantha's heart was pounding, her hands shaking as she let him lead her to the bed. There was no turning back now, no second thoughts. She had made her choice, and she would live with the consequences. Their clothes fell away, piece by piece, until there was nothing between them but skin. The feel of his body against hers was intoxicating, and she found herself lost in the sensations, the warmth of his touch, the taste of his lips, the way he whispered her name with such longing. She had never felt so desired, so alive, and for those few hours, nothing else mattered. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the silence between them heavy with the weight of what they had done. Samantha stared at the ceiling, her mind a chaotic mess of emotions. She had crossed the line, and there was no going back. She had betrayed Marcus, had jeopardized her marriage, her career, everything she had worked so hard to build. And yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Not yet, at least. Nathan turned to her, his hand reaching out to stroke her hair. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Samantha nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But she wasn't fine. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and the reality of it was beginning to sink in. She couldn't stay here, couldn't lie next to him, and pretend that everything was okay. She needed to get out, needed to think, needed to figure out what the hell she was going to do now. "I should go," she said, sitting up and reaching for her clothes. Nathan watched her, a frown creasing his brow. "Samantha, you don't have to leave." But she was already on her feet, pulling her dress over her head, avoiding his gaze. "I need to go," she insisted, her voice trembling. He didn't try to stop her as she gathered the rest of her things and headed for the door. But as she reached for the handle, he spoke again, his voice filled with concern. "Samantha, if you need to talk, I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." She paused, her hand on the doorknob, his words hanging in the air between them. She appreciated the offer, but she knew she couldn't accept it. This was her mess, her mistake, and she needed to deal with it on her own. "Thank you, Nathan," she said softly, without turning around. "But I need to figure this out by myself." With that, she opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, leaving the room and Nathan behind. The corridor was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that amplified her thoughts, making the pounding of her heart seem as even louder. She moved quickly, almost mechanically, her feet carrying her toward the elevator as if on autopilot. Her mind was still reeling from what had just happened, the weight of her actions pressing down on her like a physical force. As she descended to the lobby, Samantha felt a cold sweat break out across her skin. She couldn't believe what she had done. The reality of it was crashing down on her, piece by piece. The guilt she had managed to push aside earlier was now rising, choking her with its intensity. She had just betrayed the man she had promised to love and cherish for the rest of her life. And for what? A fleeting moment of passion, the thrill of something new. She walked out of the hotel, the cool night air hitting her like a slap. It was refreshing, but also sobering, cutting through the haze that had clouded her mind all evening. She needed to get home, needed to figure out what she was going to do. How was she supposed to face Marcus after this? How could she ever look him in the eye again, knowing what she had done? The ride home was a blur. Samantha's mind was racing, replaying the events of the night over and over, each time with more regret, more fear. She hadn't planned for any of this to happen. She had been reckless, selfish, and now she had to deal with the consequences. When she finally arrived home, the house was dark and quiet. Marcus was likely asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing inside his wife. Samantha hesitated at the door, her hand resting on the doorknob. A part of her wanted to turn around and leave, to avoid facing the reality of what she had done for just a little while longer. But she knew she couldn't. She had to go inside. She had to confront the mess she had made. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, closing it softly behind her. The house felt different, foreign, as if she were a stranger in her own life. Samantha moved quietly through the living room, slipping off her shoes as she went. She didn't want to wake Marcus. Not yet. She wasn't ready to face him. In the bathroom, she stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The red lipstick she had applied so carefully earlier was now smudged, a stark reminder of the night's events. She looked tired, worn, and older than she felt. The guilt in her eyes was unmistakable, and it made her stomach churn. She wiped off the lipstick and washed her face, the cool water, a temporary balm to her frazzled nerves. As she dried her face, she caught sight of her wedding ring in the mirror. The sight of it made her heart clench painfully. How could she have done this? How could she have thrown away everything she and Marcus had built together for one night of reckless abandon? Samantha left the bathroom and made her way to the bedroom. She paused in the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. Marcus was lying on his side, his breathing deep and even. He looked peaceful, completely unaware of the turmoil that had taken over her heart. She slipped into bed beside him, careful not to wake him. As she lay there staring up at the ceiling, the guilt and regret gnawed at her, keeping sleep at bay. She wanted to confess, to tell Marcus what she had done. But the thought of seeing the hurt and betrayal in his eyes was too much to bear. She couldn't do it. Not now. Not like this. Instead, she lay there, her mind racing, her heart heavy. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and now she had to live with it. There was no going back, no undoing what she had done. All she could do was try to figure out how to move forward, how to salvage what was left of her marriage. But as the hours ticked by, and the first light of dawn began to creep into the room, Samantha realized that she wasn't sure if she could. The guilt was suffocating, and the knowledge that she had betrayed the man who loved her was unbearable. She had wanted to feel alive again, to break free from the monotony of her life. But all she had done was ruin the one good thing she had. In the morning, Marcus woke up before she did. She felt him stir beside her, felt the warmth of his body as he leaned over to kiss her forehead, a gesture that had once made her feel safe and loved, but now only filled her with dread. "Morning, babe," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. Samantha forced a smile, keeping her eyes closed so he wouldn't see the turmoil in them. "Morning." He didn't seem to notice anything was wrong. He got up, stretching and yawning as he headed to the bathroom. Samantha lay there, frozen, unsure of what to do. She couldn't keep this secret from him forever, but the thought of telling him, of seeing his reaction, made her feel sick. When he returned from the bathroom, Marcus leaned down to kiss her again. "I'm going to make some coffee. Want some?" Samantha nodded, unable to trust her voice. She watched him leave the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to tell him. She couldn't keep living with this guilt, with this secret hanging over her. But how could she destroy his trust, his love, like that? How could she confess to the one thing that might break them forever? She spent the morning in a daze, going through the motions of getting ready for the day. Marcus, oblivious to her inner turmoil, chatted with her over breakfast, talking about their plans for the weekend, asking how the party had gone. Samantha responded as best she could, forcing smiles and nodding in all the right places. But inside, she was falling apart. As the day wore on, the weight of her guilt became unbearable. She couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything. Every time she looked at Marcus, every time he smiled at her, it felt like a knife twisting in her chest. She had to tell him. She couldn't keep this secret any longer. That evening, after dinner, Samantha finally worked up the courage to tell him the truth. They were sitting in the living room, Marcus flipping through the channels on the TV, while Samantha sat beside him, her hands clenched in her lap. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Marcus," she began, her voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you." He looked over at her, concern flickering in his eyes when he saw her expression. "What is it, Sam?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I made a mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A terrible mistake." Marcus frowned, turning off the TV and giving her his full attention. "What do you mean?" Samantha felt tears welling up in her eyes, her chest tightening with the weight of what she was about to say. "Last night at the party, I was with someone else." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at her, his expression frozen in shock, as if he couldn't quite process what she had just said. "Sam, what are you saying?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I was with Nathan. We slept together." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Marcus's face paled, his eyes wide with hurt and betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked as though he had been punched in the gut, as if the very foundation of his world had been ripped out from under him. How could you do this, Sam?" he finally choked out, his voice trembling with emotion. "How could you betray me like this?" Samantha's heart shattered at the pain in his voice, at the sight of the man she loved looking at her, as if she were a stranger. "I don't know," she sobbed, shaking her head. "I don't know why I did it. I was just so lost, so confused, and I made a terrible mistake." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing the room, running his hands through his hair as he tried to process what she had told him. "A mistake? Sam, this isn't just a mistake. You cheated on me." "I know," Samantha cried, her voice breaking. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is beg you to forgive me." Marcus stopped pacing, turning to face her, his eyes filled with tears. "Forgive you? How am I supposed to forgive you, Sam? How am I supposed to trust you again after this?" Samantha stood up, reaching out to him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "Marcus, please. I love you. I don't want to lose you." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mixture of anger, hurt, and confusion. "I need some time," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "I need to think about this." Samantha felt a fresh wave of tears well up in her eyes, but she nodded, knowing she couldn't push him right now. "Okay," she whispered. "Take all the time you need." Marcus turned and walked out of the room, leaving Samantha alone with the crushing weight of her guilt and the fear that she had just destroyed the most important thing in her life. She sank down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands as her sobs racked her body. She had made a terrible mistake, and now she was paying the price. The days that followed were some of the hardest of Samantha's life. Marcus stayed with a friend, needing space to figure out how to move forward. Samantha was left alone in the house, haunted by the memories of what she had done, the weight of her guilt almost too much to bear. She tried to focus on work, tried to lose herself in the daily routine, but it was impossible. Everything reminded her of Marcus, of the life they had built together, the life she had put in jeopardy with one reckless decision. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think of anything but the pain she had caused. When Marcus finally returned, the tension between them was palpable. He didn't speak to her at first, simply going through the motions of being in the same space. The silence was suffocating, each passing day a reminder of the damage that had been done. One evening, after a week of living in this painful limbo, Marcus finally broke the silence. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the remnants of a meal neither of them had touched in front of them. Samantha stared down at her plate, her appetite non-existent, her heart heavy with dread. "Sam," Marcus began, his voice low and filled with exhaustion. "I've been thinking, and I don't know if I can get past this." Samantha looked up at him, her heart sinking at the defeat in his eyes. "Marcus, please. I love you. I'll do anything to make this right." He shook his head, his expression pained. "I don't know if we can make this right, Sam. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Every time I look at you, all I see is him, and it kills me." Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes as she listened to his words, the reality of what she had done crashing down on her once again. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. All I can do is promise you that I'll never hurt you like this again. Please, please don't give up on us." Marcus stared at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want to give up on us, Sam. But I don't know if I can get past this. Maybe we need some more time apart to figure out what we really want." Samantha's heart broke at the thought of being apart from him. But she knew he was right. They couldn't keep living like this, in this limbo of pain and distrust. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If that's what you need, I'll give you time." Marcus nodded, his eyes filled with sadness as he looked at her. "I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. I need to clear my head." Samantha bit back a sob, nodding as she tried to keep herself together. "I understand." He stood up, walking over to where she sat. For a moment, he just looked at her, as if memorizing her face. And then he leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "I'm sorry, Sam," he whispered. "I just need to figure out if I can forgive you." And with that, he left, leaving Samantha alone in the silence of their home. As the door closed behind him, she felt the full weight of her actions press down on her, the guilt and regret overwhelming her. She had made a terrible mistake, one that had cost her the trust and love of the man who meant everything to her. As she sat there, the house empty and quiet, Samantha realized that she might never be able to fix what she had broken. The road to redemption was long and uncertain, and she didn't know if she would ever reach the end. But she knew she had to try, for Marcus, for herself, for the life they had built together. She had made a mistake, but she wasn't going to let it define her. She would fight for her marriage, for her future, for the love she still held in her heart. And maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other, one day at a time.